Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Commissioner Rushton.
Present.
Commissioner Bailey.
Present.
Chairman Wessel.
Here.
Commissioner Sotoslittle.
Here.
Commissioner Allgaier.
Here.
Commissioner Lautner.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Fulmer, for coming. Before we direct some questions to you, we'll see if there are any public comments from our large crowd out here.
I was joking earlier. They read the paper. I'm ranked number 3, so I didn't show up.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Any commissioner comments?
Welcome. Glad you're here. Yeah.
We do. Thank you for coming, and we have some prepared questions we're going to ask you, and we're going to just rotate. We'll start down at that end and ask some questions. We have about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, and then we'll give you a chance to ask some questions. But we want to thank you for coming. And I get to ask the first question. And I wondered if, since your initial interview with us, you had anything that you wish you would have said or anything you want to share about what you've learned?
Well, I did read the audit more thoroughly since my first interview because I hadn't really taken the time to do so. In reading the audit, I did want to understand one thing. There was a finding cited in the audit regarding financial controls and the internal controls policy. I'd like to ask exactly, because we had an auditor come in, but I have a finance department. We prepare all of our financials in-house. It had mentioned something in the write-up on the audit that the auditors are going to. Who prepares your financials that are audited? I guess is my fundamental question right now.
I will let Michelle answer that. She could do that, and then we'll start our questions.
We have Raymond come in and they prepare all of our financials. Probably the audit or the one you're talking about is the very first finding. We don't have a CPA on staff, and most smaller counties do not, and the cost, it's just more beneficial for us to proceed with the auditor. So a lot of your small counties have that, and that's one we're aware of, and they prepare the CAFR report and a couple other reports outside. And so we do have audits. We're audited every single year, and some years we have a single audit, some years we do not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, we did have our first interview with you, and we've done some homework since then. So we're now going to start with Commissioner Rushton, and she's going to ask the first question. And we're pretty informal with this second interview, and she may have 2 or 3 questions to redirect, and then we'll just go right on down.
Well, first off,
Oh, I'm sorry. Once again, we asked the red questions already?
Yes.
Correct, okay. I just want to make sure. Thank you.
as I was going to say, first off, thank you for bringing such a glorious day to Traverse City area. It was very nice to meet you downstairs today. And my question for you is, what is your vision for adding value to our organization and community?
Well, I think first and foremost, I have a great deal of energy that I bring to any position I hold, combined with, certainly I love the Grand Traverse region, having grown up here. The value I would add, I think I've experienced a multitude of communities and a multitude of job types in my professional career, which enables me to understand certainly better varying opinions and interests that a community holds. I think I'm certainly a very bright person. I take on challenges, I think, fully and directly. I think I work well with any staff that I've ever had, at any level I've worked. And presently, I work with two different boards, Board of Commissioners and Board of Directors. And I have full faith that they would say that I'm an extremely open and honest administrator who works well and serves their interests, but also represents my staff and employees before them directly and express the interests of the staff as well. Which in turn leads to, my current situation has led to significant positive changes, not only in how we run our programs, but also in the financials of my organization.
So follow up. What changes would you like to see here in our county?
I think it would be arrogant for me to say what changes I'd like to see. I would come into the county and into the administrative position with an open mind and open ears to understand more deeply what the issues are in the county and what changes might need to be made, if any. I know that we've had great success and stability with Chet as your administrator previously. I don't generally come into an agency or an entity where I start work and want to initiate things that are driven by me necessarily. I take the time to understand the issues before the commission, as well as issues that staff might bring to me.
Thank you.
I guess I have the second question. Technology has become increasingly important in the role of an administrator. Please share the extent of your training and experience with the use of technology in the workplace and as an educational aid.
Well, I have to admit it, I'm not the most technologically advanced human being on the planet. We are currently redoing our entire website for the commission, where I presently work to be a more hands-on, user-friendly tool to our clients that we serve, as well as for the housing commission where I work. We have about 700 landlords we work with every month, in addition to over 2,000 housing subsidy recipients. And so we're in the process right now of instituting a software transition for our agency, which is huge. Right now we're on a system that relies on an old IBM system called AS400, which is a black screen with, in our case, green letters on the screen. It's a relatively antiquated system. It's a closed system, which I work a lot with U.S. Housing and Urban Development. They're in love with closed systems because it keeps everything tidy for them and all information protected. Problem with the closed system is it's not user-friendly, and you definitely guard information, but you also limit the relationship that you have with your customer, in our case, our other clients, who are landlords, in addition to the communities. So I've learned a lot in the last few years because we bid out to do this software change. We made the decision, and my board of commissioners is fully in favor of it. I'm certainly well versed in all the Microsoft suite and a lot of financial software that I've used. And certainly, we're trying to come into the 21st century with our new software as well, because the AS400, our IBM system, has been with the commission where I am now since 1993.
Oh my gosh.
As far as technology, that's an ancient technology. Very stable. We keep praying that the AS400 won't crash for good one of these days, but we have about 5 more months before our conversion is complete. So I think I'm good. I shouldn't say I'm not technologically savvy, but I'm not the best at technology, but I certainly understand a lot. am very proficient in Microsoft Excel and the financial tools that I use. So.
Out of curiosity, which financial tools do you find most useful?
Well, I use some for property management. That's Boston Post is a specialty tool for property management. I use a lot of Excel to build performance for, we have a $30 million bond issuance we're working on right now, which would create 170 new housing units in Sioux Falls. And so I build a lot through the financial software that we use for real estate stuff.
So it sounds like your office is pretty well using tracking and things like that online.
We use software to track all our accounts payable and accounts receivables, but we also use it for property management. And then we have different software suite we use for real estate finance, which for our tax exempt bond issuance for a housing agency, aside from the attorney's fees, you're going to pay for that bond issuance. It's a fairly complicated pro forma that we run, and I'm the one in charge of the financial performance and everything.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So, of course, motivation is a big part of helping to lead our employees. Could you give us an example of how you would motivate your employees, what methods you would use, or if you have an example of what you've done in the past, share that with us?
Sure. I think first and foremost, I'm an extremely positive, supportive leader for my current employees and in the past. Certainly, we do a lot of employee retreats and we go to, I was just talking to the sheriff about the Sioux Falls has a minor league baseball team called the Canaries. So our employees go to Canaries games several times a year to really build teamwork. We do things outside of work to build that teamwork. So when I first arrived at the agency where I work now, we didn't have a lot of discussion between what we call program managers. It's another word for department head, but we have, now we have a lot of interaction. It's a very open work environment for our staff. I think it's led to a lot better retention of staff when I first got there. Everybody would cross their fingers that no staff would leave. We've instituted, and based on, we did have a union when I first started. We no longer have the public employees union. Employees voted the union out because I think the new management listened much more to their needs and concerns. And I was fairly assertive with adjusting wages and benefits to be competitive with the private sector in Sioux Falls. So I guess there's not really a specific instance I would use. I just know that my employees find me very approachable. I'm pretty gregarious and friendly, and they trust me when I tell them that I'll do something that represents them, and that I hear their interests, that I'll follow through on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. What is your 10-year outlook for Leelanau County with rising costs, increased retirees moving in, and decreased kids count with our school?
I'm sorry, what?
I'll repeat the whole thing. What is your 10-year outlook for Leelanau County with rising costs, increased retirees moving in, and low kid count, children count with our schools?
Well, I certainly think that retirees coming in, what most counties in this part of Michigan are seeing is certainly the tax base is growing, which increases your revenues, but those that are coming in don't necessarily support your school system because they don't have the children to support the schools. I went to Old Mission Peninsula School, which was closed a few years ago, reopened as a charter school recently. Same pressures are going on there. As far as the 10-year outlook, I think You know, the commissioners and the administrator's office have to look at things strategically and devise a projection plan for what revenues might be, but also marketing for Leelanau County. If you want to support the schools and increase the enrollment in the schools, we have to look at Leelanau County as a business too. It's not strictly, if you build it, they will come necessarily. I love Leelanau County, I know Leelanau County, been living here. However, those that come here, in my opinion, oftentimes don't have the betterment of the county at heart. They're looking for a beautiful place to live or retire. And so the 10-year plan would have to look at exactly, I'm a little fearful right now of a potential recession. I know that real estate values do take a downturn in this part of the country. I saw it for my farm values in 2009. I think it's going to take an effort to build a strategic plan for the next 10 years to really gauge what the population changes might be, how we advertise Leelanau County to direct people with families to support the schools, as well as how we really gauge what tax revenues and the tax base might do in the upcoming years to come. I don't really have anything more than that to say right now.
Thank you.
Well, housing is key.
That's
So we have the environment where people want to move here, but if they can't afford to move here, then they're stuck. And we're stuck without diversifying our population. But I take issue a bit with your statement about having people from outside come here because they don't want to participate. But I see them as an amazing resource of talent for our nonprofit organizations as volunteers, the kind of information and talent you couldn't buy. So it works both ways. Yeah. So I try to put a positive
I
face
would
on it.
agree.
Yeah. Let's see, where was I? Tell us
I
about
will say this, I probably wouldn't have applied for this job if I didn't already have a place to live here.
That is a
That's
truth, yes.
impact,
Mhm.
yes.
Tell us about a politically complex work situation in which you were involved.
When I was in Colorado, I took over a housing agency that was strictly county-based, and so I worked directly with the county manager's office in that case. And we saw very quickly that to create any sort of long-term and lasting housing solutions for that county had to be a multi-jurisdictional agency. And so I went from a volunteer board of 5 people through a county housing authority to a multi-jurisdictional housing authority of 9 board members, 4 of which were elected officials. So I had a city council member from Crested Butte, Colorado, a county commissioner, a city council member from Mount Crested Butte, and a city councilor from the city of Gunnison on my board, on the new board, which made for some very interesting discussions because the first project we did was in one of the towns, and all of the jurisdictions contributed money to build housing in a different jurisdiction. And that took about 12 months to work through the politics of that situation. It was extremely fragile at times as far as having the city of Gunnison, which that county is divided kind of north and south. The north part of the county is very liberal, it's the ski resorts, and then you have the ranchers in the south of the county. So the city of Gunnison, Gunnison County, putting in money to buy land in Crested Butte to build workforce housing was a huge, it had never been done before. It was certainly, I think we had 26 meetings to discuss how to fund this acquisition of public monies from other jurisdictions. And now there is an apartment complex for workers in Crested Butte that exists because of monies given by every jurisdiction. So that was a very convoluted and complicated system that we set up, but now I do know that the city of Gunnison has a workforce housing project that was funded by the other jurisdictions as well, since I left there. So I think it was a system that was needed in that particular instance. It was extremely complicated initially, not so much from knowing what to do or not to do, but handling the different personalities and interests of 4 different jurisdictions when it came to one. Sharing positions on one board. And so I'm proud of it, but I think I have more gray hair.
Yeah. I can imagine. Thank you.
So we have a large staff here. Well, we think it's large, about 123 people. And you've worked with government and county. There are 4 or 5 elected officials that you'll be working with. So you have employees who report to you and employees you have to work with. What size staffs have you managed in the past? You mention a board of commissioners. I'm interested in your interface with boards of commissioners.
Okay, I've worked in the private sector and public sectors. So in the private sector, I worked with a corporation that had over 3,000 employees. I was director of development for that entity. And I think somebody asked me earlier, what did you do with your job duties for that? And I handled all the development of new projects for that entity, as well as I was kind of like the Norm Peterson from Cheers. I fired general managers of restaurants whenever it became necessary. So we built properties throughout the U.S., mostly in Idaho, Nevada, New Mexico, and Chicago. And so I would get on a plane and dismiss people when necessary, but I also put together a lot of the lines of credit and the financing for building not only restaurants but apartments. And so a lot of the management of staff in that particular instance, I probably managed a few hundred staff, and they were mostly direct staff that I dealt with. In addition to, I dealt with general contractors and union subcontractors in certain areas of the country. As far as the public sector goes, my current staff is 25 that I directly manage with my current agency. Now, we also deal directly with 700 employees and over 2,000 clients every month, but my staff are 25. I have 5 different program managers that I manage day to day. As far as the different, I told you about the 9-member political, non-political board that I dealt with in Colorado. I have a 5-member board of commissioners I deal with presently for my current commission. They are appointed by the city. They are not elected commissioners. And then a 9-member board of directors for the nonprofit development agency that I run as well. So, I've dealt with a lot of employees, and then I find our agency is the largest housing authority in the state of South Dakota, but South Dakota is a small state. So it's a relatively small housing authority. But, we have an annual budget of just over $15 million for the commission. And then this year it could mushroom. We're working on a $30 million bond, tax-exempt bond for the development agency. Usually it's $4 to $8 million. Annual budget for the development agency that might be 40 plus million this year. It depends on whether the tax exempt bond goes through. So, I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. Thank you. Yes, you did it.
Thank you. You're a property management guy, you're a housing guy. The county has a long list of mandated responsibilities, and Housing is not one of those. All of us at this table have an interest in housing, but we have very little to do with housing, except being advocates. What in your work experience has prepared you to manage an operation with, I don't know, a dozen mandated responsibilities and a large staff, and a lot of financial responsibility, a lot of planning responsibility, a lot of supervisory responsibility, a lot of community responsibility? And I would guess that our current administrator hadn't spent an hour's worth of time in the last year on housing. So please respond to that.
Well, and I don't think that, I'll say yes. My work experience presently is housing. I don't think that managing people and managing issues can be boxed into just one issue. Yeah, I work on housing, but I'm also heavily involved with Human Resources Department of Minnehaha County, which is, I work with the city of Sioux Falls frequently on a multitude of issues that the largest housing authority in the state of South Dakota has influence over. My work experience is not just limited to housing either. I think that I understand the issues that Leelanau County grapples with. I've managed budgets far larger than $15 million a year. It's really dependent upon how open a person can be an administrator. But also, it takes some intellect to understand the issues and what each department deals with and the department budgets. I'm very confident in my abilities to do that. And I don't want, housing is what I do right now. Housing is what the majority of my job experience has been. I don't see myself limited by that. I think, if anything, putting together a $30 million bond deal is an extremely challenging intellectual endeavor. And I've done multiple ones. And I can understand a lot of different issues with, I think, tact and understanding. I can certainly manage people in various size organizations as well. So I like to think that my life in housing has prepared me for a lot of challenges too. In that housing is not always an easy job to do. We deal with NIMBYs, we deal with a lot of different issues that are very political, and it makes you bulletproof in some ways. My wife calls me Teflon sometimes. Hopefully not.
Thank you.
My turn.
Okay.
How-
This isn't that informal, by the way.
You get to relax between questions. How would you, yourself, or others, say your employer or your employees, describe your personality? Is it more like a problem solver, a motivational or influential type person, steady, stable, evenly paced, or a procedural type rules guy? How would you describe yourself, or others? How would they describe you?
I would say most would describe me as a problem solver, but also fairly visionary in my approach to things. And we're talking about presently a housing agency. But I took over an agency that had a lot of problems, internal problems, which led to external issues as well. And certainly the first 12 months that I've been in my current role was really repairing damage that had existed in the agency and working with staff and department that are program heads to figure ways to repair. Some of that required dismissal of staff and hiring of new staff with better skill sets for who were willing to invest in the culture we were trying to create. Now, my board of commissioners, I would say, describe me as very honest, smart, and dedicated to what they charged me with doing. I think all of my staff, especially my senior staff and my commissioners, are very pleased with my job performance and where the agency has gone since I took over. I will say this, I had to notify my board of commissioners because we wanted to verify that my employment. So I talked to my secretary, treasurer, and president of my board a few weeks ago, and they weren't necessarily surprised. I think they thought, I might leave at some point because I wasn't a Sioux Falls native, but they certainly were not extremely pleased at figuring out how to replace somebody with my skill set and my dedication to what they want the commission to do. And so I think the problem solver is one, but it's far greater than that. Once we solve the problems, then we have to forget about doing business that my board of commissioners and my board of directors really want to see done. It took about a year, though, to solve some of the problems that the agency had.
You talked a little bit about problem solving, but visionary.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like to you?
Well, I'll use an example. We have a fairly conservative board of commissioners, meaning conservative, that's a hard word to really think out. I have a board that represent old business in Sioux Falls, attorneys, a developer, banker, and so we wanted to apply for a MacArthur Foundation grant as part of the City of Sioux Falls, the County Human Resources, and then Affordable Housing Solutions, which is our nonprofit development entity. I have to tell you, my board of commissioners did not like the idea of providing housing for folks coming out of the Department of Corrections and not really building out workforce housing and owning workforce housing. And my staff really thought it was important. And so it probably took 6 months of discussing and presenting information to our board of commissioners to show them that recidivism in our Department of Corrections is a huge issue in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and that the Housing Commission, as well as its nonprofit partner, could make a difference in working with the city and the county Department of Human Resources. And so my staff thought it was visionary. I don't think my board of commissioners thought so at first, but we had unanimous support after 6 months of really discussing it and providing information to the board. The board now is wholeheartedly on board with that. And we did receive the MacArthur Foundation grant. We were one of 4 communities in the U.S. in San Francisco, Charleston, South Carolina, and Oklahoma. I can't think of the community in Oklahoma, but it's a pilot program for this, and we're building a 51-unit apartment project with $3 million of the funds, and then we're also employing our vouchers. And so it took the board of commissioners to sign off and really say, yes, let's do this, which was kind of a tough sell initially, but now we're all very supportive.
Can I just ask, I don't know if it's pertinent, but I'm just curious, before this housing project was put in place, what were the people doing? I mean, were they just being let out into the community to fend for themselves? Or to
Many of them are. We have a lot of usually for folks coming out of corrections with a criminal history a lot of landlords, we have crime-free housing, and a lot of the newer properties in Sioux Falls are crime-free. And so they're automatically precluded from living there. Generally, they'll find we have very aging properties that are not well kept. What we've seen are some landlords almost be, I guess, predatory in nature, in that they'll jack up the rents for somebody coming out of corrections because they know they really have no other option. And so what the commissioners did, they allocated 35 of our housing vouchers, which provides housing assistance to 35. We have almost 2,000 vouchers, so it's not a big percentage. And then we allocated $3 million to a low-income housing tax credit project that's 51 units that will have counseling facilities on site. And certainly we work with Human Services Department of the county to set that up.
I guess I was just wondering if those people stayed in your community.
They do. Many of them wind up living on the streets and get thrown back in prison fairly quickly, though.
That was my question. Thank you.
I've been sitting here thinking how to phrase this question, because I can readily see how your skills translate to an administrator. I mean, you're a consensus builder, you've dealt with politics readily, you deal with staff, you manage or have managed larger staffs and certainly larger budgets. And I guess I would ask, what other traits that you feel you have that would be readily transferable to success in being this county's administrator? It's easy to see as you're talking.
I haven't given enough, huh? Okay.
Oh, you've given a lot. You've given a lot.
I will say this. Oversight of staff. I think one trait that I haven't really touched on, I can be fairly demanding of my staff as well, and fairly firm in enforcing codes of behavior that both my board of commissioners and my board of directors require of my staff. Consensus building and everything is great, but when the rubber meets the road, there are instances where an administrator has to be the heavy. And I think in my last interview, somebody asked what should my past employees think of me. It depends on who you talk to, really. Because I have dismissed more employees than I probably like to admit over the course of my career. And it's mostly with having a firm approach to enforcing the culture that my commissioners, my corporation wants to instill in all of its staff and build a team that wants to build. Certain things you can't be wavering. And when it comes to code of conduct and behavior, that's one thing. I don't have a lot of flexibility. But we clearly define what's expected of our employees. And I have read some of the non-union employee handbook or guidelines, and certainly the Teamsters document as well. I think it outlines certain codes of behavior, but it doesn't necessarily outline, at least what I read, repercussions to certain behaviors. That's one thing that, as an administrator, I like to think that I'm very open with my staff, and there's clear understanding of lines that should not be crossed with my staff, both from a written document, but also from my spoken word and my actions. So.
That was what I was really going for. Thank you. And if I could ask one follow-up question, give us an example of how you've had an employee that you really didn't want to dismiss, but it was a difficult situation of some sort. How have you handled that? If you can find an example.
I had a director of development a few years ago in a different position that I'm holding now, who was extremely stable and reliable. He was bright, And one day he kind of lost it with my finance director at the time. And it was F on this, F on that, and a lot of names cast towards that staff person's way. And we had a very clear code of conduct that if you did something like that, especially with clients or staff, that it was a dismissible offense. I didn't wind up dismissing him, and here's the reason. I sat down with that finance director and this director of development and, asked what exactly happened. So the finance director said, I was very respectful to him. I didn't deserve to have that language passed my way. I don't want him to be fired. I don't want him to leave. He's a valuable part of our company. I'd rather us try and work through things. And so at the behest of the finance director, I did not dismiss that employee, whereas I would have had the finance director not said no. I know that's not the example you wanted to hear, but it also shows that you can enforce rules, but you're also managing people and building a team. And so to dismiss that person for breaking, he clearly broke the rules and broke the code of conduct. But his coworker, his team member, told me I don't want to fire. And advocated. And so, I talked to both of them still. This was several years ago. And they're actually friends and still work together. They're in different corporations, but they still work together from time to time on projects. So I've dismissed employees that I didn't value far easier. Usually those that are dismissed are clear violations, sexual harassment, different rules that are broken that are so significant that I can't think of an instance where I fired somebody that really had value to the agency and entity, because most of them really were part of the team and knew the rules of behavior. And that was the instance where somebody that was highly valued really brings the rules of behavior and conduct.
Thank you.
So I'd like for you to expand upon your experience working with unions. You said that you had a union when you started there, I believe you said, and then it dissolved. We have 6 collective bargaining units here. So
And I've looked at 2 of the 6, I guess, but I couldn't really read more out of that. I worked with unions quite a bit, mostly when I was in private development. We dealt with union houses that we hired for any type of construction job we had. We worked in the city of Chicago quite a bit. I was much younger then. I had not worked with unions before I took the position, building restaurants and apartments in union cities. Sitting down at a table with union negotiators, I find typically it's just like negotiating with any other entity. There are occasions, the union that we had at the current commission I worked for, I didn't think represented the employees well. And I told the employees after I left the union for the first time, it was probably 5 months after my hire. I know you guys don't want to hear this, but I don't think the union's invested in you. And I don't know if you've really met and discussed your interests with the union, but from my experience at sitting with other unions, they're not pushing me as an administrator to really, they make a demand and my board of commissioners counters with a much lower and they kind of give up. I found out that it's because only, at that time, it was a voluntary pay-in into the union of our employees, and now all employees were paying in. And so what happened, the union was there for about a year and a half after I took over, and we weren't out to break the union by any means. But I felt like my board of commissioners was not real upset that, receptive to working with the union. I looked at the wage scales that were in the collective bargaining agreement. I didn't think they were adequate for our employees to retain our employees over time. And so I met with the employees, and the board of commissioners said, if you want to meet with the employees, see what happens. And they took a vote and voted to get rid of me in that particular instance. I worked for 5 or 6 years though, negotiating with unions in Chicago on not only contracts, but buyout of contracts in the construction industry when I was vice president of development. I have to admit, that's one of the reasons I left that position. It was rather trying at times. I guess I have plenty of experience at negotiating with unions. Most recently, I think the employees with my agency now are better off without the union. I'm going to say that across the board, though, by any means. I think unions are definitely necessary in certain instances.
So follow-up question then, how would the union president describe you?
Honest, patient, but tough.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been asking you a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go a different route here.
Okay.
I look at the 7 of us here. We're like a team, or we try to be a team, I should say. We look at Administrator Janik as our coach. We hired him to be our coach. We look at him for guidance. Sometimes he looks at us for guidance. You got commissioners coming and going every 2 years. You don't know who's going to be here. There's a turnover. So you as an administrator, what would you expect from the board, or what do you want from the board for you to succeed as our administrator?
Well, I think that's obviously clearly defined direction, but that's not always the case. That's easier said than done. I think that an administrator and the board relationship is such that I'm very open with my board of commissioners now. I have been in the past where I had electeds on my board in order to provide them with the information so that they can give an educated direction to me. Oftentimes, a lot of the issues, certainly housing-related issues, a lot of my board, they're not housing specialists, so they're confusing. They're confused me sometimes too, as any issue can be. Water quality issues can be confusing and highly technical at times. And so I see it as a two-way street. I look to the Board of Commissioners. It's really my rudder to show me which direction they want an agency or an institution or organization to go. But it can't be just them telling me. As an administrator, I have to provide them. I'll provide them my perspective if they want. I often do. But I provide them with as much information as I can in a digestible manner, an understandable manner, so that they can provide the directives that I need as an administrator. It's not easy. Most of the time, though, the boards that I've worked with that have very differing opinions, we find a way to come to at least an agreement on a direction that serves the community the best way that we think it can. And so I used the MacArthur Foundation grant as an example. We had 3 out of 5 board members that were absolutely opposed to that when it was first brought before them. They did not tell me table it. I know the board president was in favor of it, so that helped a little. But, by providing information and discourse and dialogue, respectful between the board and the director's office in this case, we came to, I think, a point where everybody could get on board and actually believes in what we're doing, and that it is a positive thing for the community. So, I guess I'm the coach of my board of commissioners in some ways, in that, they ask me for my opinion quite frequently. And fortunately, I think that's because they respect me, and I appreciate that. They will tell me when they don't agree with me, that's for sure. But I think we have a wonderful working relationship with my group. I don't know if that answers your question.
So you probably have First Nation people close in some of your communities, and how did you manage that relationship between these people and bring them into the community together and work together?
Well, that we do in South Dakota. The Sioux Nation plays a significant role, especially in housing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reservations, certainly, we have a very complicated relationship. That's the best way I can put it presently. Part of our MacArthur Foundation grant, though, is focused on populations that are overrepresented in the Department of Corrections and underrepresented in the workforce and housing community. Our Native population is probably the most significant one affected in South Dakota. We meet directly with Native Council leadership to go over housing solutions in Sioux Falls for Native populations. We don't have direct contact with reservation authorities, however, because they have their own housing agencies for the reservations. These are very large reservations in South Dakota. As I said, it's a complicated relationship that we have, but certainly we are focused on working to provide solutions to the Native population in Sioux Falls through the agency I work for. A lot of the work we do is through human resources, so we combine housing, the housing authority with human resources, because the housing authority has a lot of the first contact with Native populations as they come through our doors to access housing assistance. So, it's a considerable focus that we work with city leaders, county leaders, and certainly some of the Native board leaders to provide as many solutions as we can.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, it's complicated, as you may know, because there's no clear position of what we think is best isn't always the solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's as diplomatic as I can.
Perspective, yes, thank you.
How would you keep the public and the media apprised of county issues, and what role would you see yourself taking in our county?
That's really up to the Board of Commissioners initially. I mean, presently, I'm the spokesperson for my commission, as well as our private nonprofit development entity. So it really depends. My commissioners presently would prefer that I, as director, represent their views and what the commission undertakes quarterly or annually. And so I would really rely on this board of commissioners to direct me as to what's appropriate or not, because different jobs I've held, my boards have exerted more or less control over my communication with the press and the community. It all depends on what the board of commissioners would prefer. I'm certainly comfortable in speaking to the press. I'm also very comfortable in that because it can be a sticky wicket sometimes. And we will.
Thank you.
Looking at the clock, we've probably got time for one more round as we do this and then allow you to ask questions. But you've shared in the first interview with us and today lots of success stories. We all learn from the mistakes we've made. And sometimes the bigger the mistake, the more we learn. Could you share with us a couple of times where you've really messed up and what you learned about that?
I don't know about really messed up, but we all make mistakes, and I made them too. I would say, let me think on this just a bit. I don't know if I've made any significant mistakes in what I do. I will say I did make a mistake here in Traverse City when I took over as director of the Housing Commission here. It's located on Carter Road. Their office was in, I think, just an outbuilding that had a garage attached to it. And it was a troubled agency. I came in directly from building restaurants. I didn't know anything about housing. I was extremely deferential to the board of commissioners. Meaning, well, they probably know better than I do officially. And I should, if they say jump, I'll say high five. Because they've been burned in the press, they fired their previous director, they've had a rough go of it. A very tactical error from an administrator's perspective in that it became 2 or 3 months of trying to be receptive and almost placate a board that felt burned and betrayed by the previous director. Became a situation where I had board members overreaching, over managing the day-to-day affairs of that commission. I consider that an extremely large mistake on my part, and it took months to try and correct it, and I don't think I ever did. I left after 2.5 years. We had turned the financial position of that commission around. I found it wholly unmanageable as an administrator. I don't blame the board members, I blame myself because I did not have a clear path when I started as to how I should handle the board of commissioners. And 2 commissioners, in fact, I just felt ramrodded by them. And I remember going to Traverse City as the city manager at the time and just saying, hey, I'm going to step down. I can't take it anymore. It's untenable to be the director of that commission. That was my fault. That was a screw up that I made in how I dealt with the commission initially. And I know that the director that they hired after me, 2 of those commissioners were asked to step down because they would come in the office and try and tell staff what to do. So they were overreaching. And that I consider somewhat of a failure.
Thank
I
you.
haven't really made any big financial failures, except the house that I made older.
Thank you. Deb?
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Okay.
This isn't as laid back as that.
That's why I asked the question. Okay, scenario. You've been advised by the county fiscal officer that the county budget needs to be reduced 10% or more for the next fiscal year. What procedure would you use to decide how this reduction will be determined and the steps that you would take?
Well, first, I think I'd have to advise the Board of Commissioners that we have this issue. And I meet with all the departmental managers to discuss what necessary steps might be taken to reduce each department's budget by 10% if possible. But first and foremost, in meeting with the commissioners, I'd try to get feedback as to direction on some programs or funds that might be less touchable than others, I guess is the way to put it. Had to do this before, and it's meeting with all of my senior staff and managers to determine where we can trim some of our budget. It's never an easy decision to make. It's not easy too. You have to, if any staff cuts might need to be made, you have to certainly balance that with looking at your CBAs and everything to see how it works through certain things. So I guess involve the Board of Commissioners first, meet with my departmental managers to determine where parts of the budget can be trimmed.
Excuse me, when you say department managers, do you mean elected officials?
No, I do not. I mean, some are elected, I guess. Elected officials as well. It really depends on what the Board of Commissioners, what direction they want to take. But when I say department managers too, it's the non-electeds as well.
Okay.
In addition to this. I apologize.
I just wanted that
I always
distinction.
forget,
It's government.
it would be everybody involved, elected and non-elected,
Okay.
to try and figure out where 10% could be trimmed. That's a fairly healthy trimming, though, I will say. So it would be a process that would take a few months to really iron out.
And if you have resistance in certain departments, how do you handle that?
That's a good one. We have to work through and prioritize where the cuts have to come. And the commissioners have to be supportive of the administrator's office to make sure that the hard decisions that are made are followed through upon. So the administrator's office certainly would have to take the tough swing when certain cuts have to be made. I like to consider myself diplomatic, but when it comes to a 10% cut anywhere, diplomacy can only go so far. So,
Well, in a situation like that, and as you mentioned earlier, we may have tough times coming. We may actually have to do something like that at some point in the future. So I'm really curious. That's why I asked the questions. How do you plan on working with our department heads, with your Board of Commissioners and your citizens that are screaming at you, because their taxes are too high, blah, blah, blah?
no, I mean, being forthright and honest as far as where the cuts could possibly be made. Not all cuts are necessarily feasible when it comes to cutting critical services. Certain things are off limits, but you have to express things clearly and really explain why cuts could be made in certain areas and not others. It's never going to be palatable to certain folks, but if you have information to back it up and the citizens who don't like have the taxes go up to cover a shortfall. You know, it's not easy, but you have to make the tough calls, and the Board of Commissioners are behind the Administrator's Office on their fees.
And you're telling us you're the man that can do that?
And telling them that.
So, given your management style, which is open, which is positive, how would you maintain, if you were a commissioner, your accountability for the county while delegating responsibilities and authority to staff?
I think that's pretty easy. I mean,
Give you a softball.
I always take responsibility for the decisions made by my current commission. I always have. When the buck stops with, in my case, the director's office, the administrator's office, a bad decision that I support as director or administrator ultimately is my decision. The department head, an elected head of a department, it's still the administrator's decision and the county commissioner's decision ultimately. So I take responsibility for decisions that I make presently, and I don't anticipate that change.
Thank you.
How familiar are you with the Michigan Open Meetings Act?
I've used it before when I was with the Housing Commission here. I've used a lot of different open meetings acts in different states, so I'm pretty familiar. I'd have to certainly read it and brush up on it again.
And Robert's rules?
Robert's rules, I'm very familiar with.
That's my only question. Thank you.
In light of our organization culture, how can you equally represent each department heads or officials while maintaining an independent view?
Again, that's, in my opinion, that's a relatively easy to answer. I mean, I'm close but not friends with all of my program managers now. I don't really go out for drinks, but I have a laugh and certainly consider my relationships friendly with my management staff. I still look at things very unemotionally when it comes to my budget and the financials of any organization I've been with, but also not just financials, but also the effectiveness of different programs, the different endeavors or initiatives we partake with. So it's not difficult for me to judge, I wouldn't say harshly, but realistically judge the performance of a particular department. I don't think it's living up to my expectations as a manager and administrator, but certainly the commissioner's expectations. I think that level of honesty is needed to get the most out of my departmental or program managers as well. They don't always like what I tell them, but I do believe in the 5.5 years I've been with my current commission, we've gotten the most out of our programs, both from a fiscal perspective, but also from a program performance perspective. We're delivering more services and more assistance to more people than we ever have. And part of that's due to the ability to be friendly and supportive with my staff, but also hold them to task and provide them clear expectations as to their performance. So I don't find that a difficult situation to be.
Got one follow-up question here. What policies or procedures did you implement to improve morale?
Well, definitely implemented a new employee handbook, what we call. Once the CBA went out, we had to come up with an entirely new system of managing employees. Certainly, we had an employee handbook for the union members, which were administrative and management personnel. That I think fundamentally changed the culture and support of our employees because they were involved in writing. And their interests were represented in that particular document. This 6-month process was somewhat painstaking from an administrative perspective, tedious at times. We did that, but also having staff meetings, and I heard Chet earlier talking, or somebody talking about Chet, we have departmental manager meetings. Hugely important. That really wasn't done with departmental managers. It was done agency-wide when I got to my current position, which was a train wreck. It was just like a bitch session for all of our employees. And we didn't really have constructive dialogue. Now we have much more constructive program management meetings, and then we take issues to the employees that we want to have constructive dialogue about and get their feedback from, which works a whole lot better than just getting everybody in the room for an hour, which is what we did when I first got there. That, and now we have an employee entertainment fund, which we go to Canary's baseball games and different things in the Sioux Falls area. We go bowling. They still wanted to go bowling during COVID, which I poo-pooed, which didn't go over well, but we never really had a culture where employees engaged each other outside of work, and that would be which I think has been a very good thing to kind of create a team perspective, and that none of us are alone if things don't go well with a particular branch or program. Folks come to even the coworkers and provide advice or assistance, which is hugely beneficial. So that's my answer. Thank you.
I'm sticking to it. So you're obviously well-versed in housing and passionate about that.
Mm-hmm.
What else are you passionate about?
I'm passionate about a lot of things. I'm an outdoorsman. I grew up hunting quite a bit. My family raised English pointers, so we had anywhere from 10 to 22 dogs at any one time. And so we used to do field trials with our dogs. I own a Rhodesian Ridgeback now, which is a 105-pound large red dog who couldn't smell anything to save his life. But, I enjoy the outdoors. I'm passionate about fly fishing. I was a big contributor to certain conservancy groups out in the Mountain West to preserve some pristine fishing waters out there. Silver Creek is a spring-fed creek out in the Wood River Valley of Idaho that I consider just one of my true at-peace parts of the country where I can fly fish and just be at peace, and it's a zen-like experience. I'm passionate about economic development too. I'm passionate about the Grand Traverse region for one. I grew up working in the orchards as a teenager. As a kid too, we used to have a farm stand on Peninsula Drive where me and I had 3 siblings. We'd get cherries and just put them out on a card table as an umbrella. I'm passionate about figuring out how best to manage growth in this region. As I said, most of my friends right now are in the farming and ag industry. Their opinions are certainly, they have very strong opinions about how development's going. I listen to them talk about how they've been stewards of the land for decades or centuries in some cases, or a century plus. And that what they view as outside influences, I don't know if it is or not. hamper their right to utilize their land to the maximum in order to afford or provide them with a return on their long-term investment. I think there are big issues that have to be worked through. I have to be honest, I think the township form of government can be complicated and can complicate things from a land use perspective to help manage some of these issues. That's part of what intrigues me about the state of Michigan and working through the issues here. You know, I'm very passionate about this area and trying to find long-term solutions for issues that housing is only one of them. Please don't limit me to being a housing guy. But, you know, housing is certainly an integral one. You know, when you drive by a McDonald's and it's $21 an hour on the sign, you got a problem. Not that people that work at McDonald's don't deserve $21 an hour, but that's certainly the highest wage at a McDonald's I've seen in the entire U.S. in my travels. So I think my ability to work through some very complicated issues is part of what makes me passionate about this region, but also passionate about this position. I see a lot of challenges that way ahead. I don't really divert my path from challenges. I'm not as young as I once was, but I still think I have a lot of energy and passion for the area and believe in the area. And I think that's what all of us really want. No matter what your political leanings might be, we want the best long term for Leelanau County and the Grand Traverse region, and that's what I'm doing. That was a long-winded response.
That's okay. Good response.
How do you think you accept criticism?
Well, unless I deliver it to myself. I'm pretty self-critical, so that's one thing that I think I accept it well from others, but I tend to take it very much to heart and want to improve and not make that same mistake twice. So I think I accept it well. Probably my worst critic is myself.
Thank you.
Last question, and then it's your turn.
Okay.
Chad, how long have you been here?
10.5 years.
So he's been here 10.5 years, and sometimes he gets directed to make decisions and take action that he may not agree with. In fact, he may strongly disagree. What might this board ask you to do that you would refuse to do?
Put politics above my position. Meaning, if we have an issue that is extremely political, and I think the decision of the board is based strictly on a political decision, and if it's not, may not be, let me think of the proper word, may not be the proper administrative decision, or it would not be in keeping with the county administrator's position to take or do, I would probably push back pretty hard and disagree.
Thank you.
Answer?
Thank you. Well, you've done your homework, and you've been here twice. Do you have any
I
questions?
wasn't here the first time. I was on the.
Well, you were-
I couldn't see anybody.
We have another interview today, and then we're scheduled to have some discussion tonight at our meeting. Anything you'd like to leave us with? Any questions you have of any one of us?
First, I want to just say thank you for taking the time to meet with me. You know, I truly love this area. I consider it my home. My wife certainly loves Travis too. Excuse me, in this region. I don't think you'd be disappointed if you were to hire me. I know you wouldn't. I don't think I've had anybody disappointed with my job performance who's hired me during my professional career. I'm extremely hardworking, but I'm smart and I'm honest and I'm good-natured, mostly. I don't necessarily have too many questions. The questions that I would have are more, having read some of the union contracts and the non-union documents, would be more concerning potential employment if I were offered the position. I do want to know, just from anybody who wants to answer it, what you envision for your next administrator. I don't know Chet. I've met Chet. I talked to him briefly today. He seems like a very approachable, level-headed guy. And, you know, I think he has good humor, though, about it, too. I do believe that to be a county administrator, or really an administrator at any level of government, you gotta have good humor or you won't survive. Too many issues are too difficult and frustrating sometimes to find that if you don't have the wherewithal to laugh at each other and yourself, then you won't get very far. So, can anybody tell me specifically what you want in your county administrator? What do you think is the most important attribute for your county administrator?
Well, when we started this process, we collectively developed a candidate profile, and I think you saw that in the brochure that you originally responded to. But anybody here want to summarize that?
I'll just say honesty is an important factor for me. Integrity, honesty. That's number one.
The ability to work with people effectively, listen to them intently, and solve problems. Those are major for me, as well as the ones that you just mentioned, Mr. Rushton. And I love the fact that you recognize sense of humor is important, so that everything isn't all heavy all the time.
I think it's going to be very important for the administrator to truly understand the basic duties of a county administrator and concentrate on those without getting sidetracked by the chaff.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it comes down to leadership, not just in this building, but out in our community. I expect the administrator to be our cheerleader out there in the community, sell us, just like we're supposed to as commissioners. The other tradition I would like to see continued, even if I'm not sitting here, is that you don't know about, is if you're given a position, you have to buy every commissioner a cherry pie for their birthday.
You know, having grown up on a cherry farm, I really don't like cherry pie.
It's okay, we don't share.
So I'm all for giving cherry pies to anybody who wants it.
You can always do apple. Apple's another crop in our county.
Well, there's always grapes, so a few of those around. So yes, leadership and your ability to interface with the community and be a valuable, visible part in the community, I think is real important. Knowing history, you know, and you do. Yes.
Well, and I did time it. My farm is on Montague Road. It takes me 31 minutes to get here. So it's not the shortest drive, I'd like it a little shorter. Ultimately, my farm is held in trust, so I have two siblings still living, and my mom's 85, and so ultimately, you know, I know my two siblings, they're not invested in this area anymore, so I'd like to move closer if I were to get this position ultimately. don't think we'll hold the farm for another 50 years. I can't afford to buy myself.
In addition to all of these things, you're going to have to be a good manager, because we have employees who work for you and employees who will work with you. So it can be a complex management process. So a good manager with good people skills is important. And then you have to deal with all of us.
Which is probably true, manager and good people skills. You know, it's all we do.
Well, all of that, and we didn't talk too much about it today, but we want an administrator that's not going to give us surprises. Keep us well informed, keep the community well informed, keep the staff well informed. Any last comments to Mr. Fulmer?
Yes, thank you for coming.
Thank you for
Really
having me.
appreciate that
Yes,
opportunity.
thank you for
Believe
traveling.
it or not, I've enjoyed it. I'm not a big, I don't like interviews. I don't even like conducting interviews.
Well, you're very open.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will take a break.
Yeah.
Until 4 o'clock.
Yep.
So did Wally Hooper help you with this interview?
We just talked about Mr. Hooper downstairs, yeah.
As soon as he said Montague.
Yeah, yeah.
And how they can be called upon in different elements to be able to support each other. So I think that that's whether it be staff here and how we can all support each other, or it be different organizations and how they integrate housing issues, early childhood development, economic development, you know, the business community, all those things, workforce development. I think that having that ability to kind of see how everything works together to make a community, I think is one of the key components.
Thank you.
Welcome back. My first question is, as you know, technology has become an increasingly important part of any administrator's role. Share with us the extent of training and experience with the use of technology in the workplace or as an educational aid that you have been privy to.
It was interesting, of course, times have certainly changed, but one of the first things in terms of that I had the opportunity to bring technology into systems that hadn't really had it before is in the military. I was a training officer. They used to still use the old projector with the slides, and you write on the plastic, and you know that type of thing. And we got everything automated, and everything, you know, able to use computers and technology and things that could be saved and could be utilized on a variety of different platforms based on how people learn. So understanding that people learn differently and how we can utilize technology to help to support that. Myself, I would not consider myself techie. I have a new 14 iPhone. That gives me any bonus points. It has an amazing camera, I'll tell you that. But I have used technology in terms of, you know, computers, Word, all of the major operating systems, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint, which I've heard from some people, sometimes PowerPoint either has power or a point, but there's a lot of, you know, use of technology, and things are certainly changing at breakneck speed. So I would welcome the opportunity to learn if there's new technology out there that we're implementing at the county level, or to be part of that, or to see how that can be implemented in a positive way.
Thank you.
So motivation is, of course, a very important part of being a supervisor. So what would your methods be when it came to motivating an employee, if need be?
Well, I think setting expectations early on and helping to ensure that people have the opportunity to succeed. I think we talked about this a little bit at the first interview. And I think, if I may, I've been thinking a lot about my comment about integrity and compassion as a component of that. And after going back and listening to, you know, some of the communication, some of the conversation of the board afterwards, I just wanted to clarify, if I may, that my kind of comment about being compassionate, I think as a leader, is, it's not a sign of weakness to be able to be compassionate. And it takes a very confident leader to be compassionate. So I think, if people are insecure in their own abilities or whatever, they lack that ability to be compassionate sometimes. So I would welcome that as a leadership skill, to be able to bring that. I think being a good listener, being fair, but again, you can only be fair if you set expectations up front for people and have that transparency about what the expectations are. So I think setting smart goals that are measurable, that are accountable, that have a timeline, I think that's part of what would help to establish a positive leadership style.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I did not take that as a weakness. I think that compassion is often a motivator. So thank you for that.
So you've lived here for a while in the area. You're involved in the community, both with your job and outside your job. What is your 10-year outlook for Leelanau County with rising costs, increased retirees moving in, and decreased with the kids count in our schools?
It's going to be, it is a challenge. I mean, all those things you just mentioned, the whole dynamics of our county is changing significantly. As the number of retirees and older people move into the area, the issues with the schools and villages and things like that, there has to be a lot of communication. And I think communication on all those fronts is going to be the key, to be informed, to be, I think informed is the key thing, and to make sure that we have all the resources that are available to us, and using the technology and using some of these other components, and just integrating a lot of these systems so that we are keeping track, housing, and all those other components. How are we going to be managing that? How are we going to be tracking that? Elmwood Township, we had our trustee meeting last night. Of course, housing and workforce development and all those things, are critical issues. We're in this scenario that we've never been before with the number of people in our county that are over the age of 60, and how that demand is going to be on infrastructure and services and a lot of things. So I think that this is definitely a time of change. And I think if you have the right mindset, sometimes change brings about incredible opportunities. And I don't think we even really know what those opportunities are yet for the county, to be able to look at a 10-year projection in terms of what that's going to mean. The whole housing situation could change as people age out, and what is that going to mean in terms of the economics of the county. So it's an interesting time. I'm definitely looking forward to being part of it.
Thank you.
So what was one of the most difficult situations you had to deal with in your professional career, and how was it resolved?
I look back and I've never been one to dwell on crisis or challenges. It's part of life. So I can't think of any one thing that stands out that is the most critical thing or challenging thing that I've had to deal with in my professional career. I said it, I think, at the initial interview, and I will reiterate that certainly the impact of COVID has been the most challenging thing that I think any of us probably have had to deal with in our career or in our lives. How do we navigate through that? How do we, all the different things that have changed, social interactions, how people relate to each other, how we engaged in the community. If we can come through this stronger, smarter, and have better systems and processes, I think that, again, I don't see it as a crisis, I see it as a learning opportunity, and some that could be maybe glass half full, glass half empty type thing, but I think that it's going to be interesting to see 2 to 3 years from now, what are the new advancements, what are the new, again, to use the word technologies that have come out of this COVID experience that we may not been a part of or had the opportunity to experience if not for this. So every experience, as long as we learn from it, is a positive thing.
Tell us about professional work experiences that are most related to the administrator position here.
I think that some of the key elements being a representative of the county, whether it be relationships with legislators. I'm very fortunate that I had the opportunity to engage with our congressional representatives, served on Congressman's advisory committee for the appointments for West Point and for some of the academies. So I had the opportunity to do that. So I think, and then have Wayne Schmidt, new senator, quite well, and then our House representative. That's all changing, obviously, with the redistricting. So I think having political knowledge and savvy in terms of who the players are in our county, I think is a key point. Knowing who the business partners are in our community, I think will be important in this position. Again, it gets back to some of the things that I mentioned about relationships and relationship building and how that's key to make sure that we're gaining insight of our community partners and our legislative partners so that the board can be informed about things that are happening in your constituents. I think things, opportunities, whether it be grants or different things that are happening that could benefit the community financially. All of those things, I think, are part of that relationship building and part of that communication that will help to be able to support the role of administrator. Did I answer that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and when you come here, you're working with 123, there are 123 employees here, there are elected officials you have to work with that you don't manage, but you have to work with.
I think the relationship, building the accountability.
And then there is a board.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is first and foremost. I mean, really, I see the role of the administrator as being, as we talked about before, as being a resource person, is having their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the county, happening in the building, happening around the county. So I think that being able to be an effective communicator is a key component of that, and sharing that information. And obviously there are the responsibility part to make sure that things are getting done and that there are goals that have been set by the commissioners are being managed effectively.
Thanks.
I'm going to piggyback on that question a little bit. There are a number of elected officials, and I don't think we have any elected officials that aren't strong personalities. And as county administrator, you have lots of responsibility, but oftentimes not much authority. How do you build a team with the sheriff, the prosecutor, the judges, the clerk, the register of deeds, all who have the ability to hire their own staff, pretty much make their own decisions, and could tell you go fly a kite if they want to? How do you do that? And does your military background help you with that?
Well, normally the chain of command, you would think yes, it would, but I guess I have to look internally into myself. What was the motivation that made me want to put myself out there to be an elected official in terms of an Elmwood Township trustee? It's because at the core of it, I think we all have a desire to want to serve and make things better. And so if we can find that common ground, why we did this in the first place, like, what is it about us that makes us want to make a difference? What is it about this county that makes us want to put ourselves out there? Because it's not glamorous. I've sat through some of the county commissioner meetings. I've seen the challenge. I've sat through some of the short-term rental discussions as a township trustee. It wasn't pleasant, but at the end of the day, we all are doing what we're doing because we want to make a difference. And so I think that that's got to be the starting point for each of these discussions, is that the only way that we can make things better is to work collectively. And if we're competing against ourselves, then we're just wasting resources. So I hope sincerely that the intent would be is to find that common ground on why we all are doing what we're doing, and then how do we build on that.
And do you have in your work history some example of where you've been able to pull that off, finding common ground in a difficult situation?
Absolutely. I think, and again, I may have shared this early on in my career, but I think it's relevant, and I noticed that the passion of different segments of the community. We've seen that here at the commissioners' meetings and things like that, certainly the township. But one particular example that I remember had to do with different factions of the community, whether it be the tourist industry versus the manufacturing industry, or in the situation I'm thinking of, the large military installation in Crawford County. And you had to find common ground. You had to find balance between people that want to fish the holy waters unobstructed, and in terms of the fly fishermen and everything else, and then you've got bombing happening on the bombing ranges, maybe 20 miles, 30 miles away. And how do you find a way to demonstrate to all of those factions that, look, we can't have economy if you don't have some of these other components. So there has to be some sense of balance. And that certainly is not always easy. But hopefully you generate the voice of reason, and that's the best we can do at some point. Sometimes people don't want to hear the voice of reason, and that's their choice. So we just have to do the best we can.
Thank you.
My question for you is, how would others, or how would you describe your personality? One that is a problem solver, a person who motivates or influences people, paced or stable, steady, or are you one that is all about procedures and rules?
I can see a little bit of myself in every one of those.
What's your strong point?
It's interesting. I just happen to have this in front of me, and I think this probably, this was a magazine that I was very honored to be recognized in, Influential Women of Northern Michigan, and it really was an article. I was recommended for this based on leadership style. So I believe that I was nominated for this because of my ability to be a coalition builder, because of my ability to bring people together, to implement change, to set clear paths for direction, goal setting, strategic planning, those kinds of elements. So I think that I'm definitely strategic in my processes. I like to say thoughtful, but I also am not one to have process paralysis. At some point you have to make a decision. You have to be willing to move forward on things, but you have to do your due diligence first. So I think that I'm not any one of those. I like to think that I implement a lot of those different styles.
Thank you for that.
Follow-up?
Oh, that's it,
Okay.
no.
Okay. Well, I will build on that a little bit. Give us an example of what you feel would be a good example that built on your strengths in terms of accomplishing something that you consider to be major accomplishment. You were talking about your leadership skills, and congratulations, by the way, on being honored. That is an honor. But give us an example of something that you've done that made people in that particular organization recognize you as a change leader, as a leader, so on and so forth. Yeah.
And I think throughout the Chamber of Commerce work, I've always kind of gravitated to that term, change maker, and not for change's sake, but for the sake of making things better. That's always been what motivated me. I think it was one of the things that inspired me. We talked about the PACE program before, so not to kind of dwell on that too much, but the fact of what that represents. A multi-county initiative to establish services and programs for a demographic that crosses all of those entities. Regardless of what the outcome of that was, being able to manage and engage different communities, different counties, in fact, as to what their buy-in or what the impact would be for their constituents as part of this multifaceted initiative that people didn't even really understand, I think was something that was really exciting to me, to be able to be an educator, to be able to be a collaborator, to be able to be someone that could help to not only justify a program, but encourage people to donate their funds to it. And the fact that we generated more than $3 million, I guess, is the best testament that I was effective in that, is that people understood at the end of the day what the initiative was about, why it was important for our community, how it was going to change families and people's lives. And I think that being able to communicate that effectively was probably something I'm incredibly proud of.
Thank you.
Interesting. So, and I apologize if we asked you this in your first interview. Why don't you talk a little bit about we have 6 collective bargaining units here at the county. So have you had experience either side of the table or working on behalf of the company for the union negotiations?
Well, unions are something that have been very familiar to me in regards to in the healthcare environment. There's the nurses unions and the environmental workers unions, and so I've been familiar with it. I have never sat at the bargaining table myself. I've had to communicate the outcome of the bargaining at times. So sometimes, even in a more difficult situation, sitting at the table is having to justify the outcome of it, that has not always been positive, and especially in a healthcare environment, because the people's lives are at stake, and it's incredibly passionate for a lot of people that are being served, as well as those that are doing the serving. So I think from that perspective, I also understand that there's a bargaining committee, or there's a union team that sets this forth. So it's not one individual that makes all the decisions. It's a team that's involved in that process. And I have had some training most recently because Elmwood Township and our fire department it was determined that they were looking into unionizing, and so we had some training on what is appropriate in terms of what can be discussed, what can't be discussed during this process. So by no means am I an expert on this, but I'm also not a novice, and I certainly understand that it can at times be an incredibly stressful process, not just for those who are going through it, but for everyone that is engaged, because as you're negotiating some elements for some, then you're creating challenges for other departments. So it's a walk in delicate negotiations.
Thank you.
In light of our organization culture, how can you equally represent each department heads or officials while maintaining an independent view?
I think that the only way that I would want to create what my view is by hearing what the collective wisdom is. You know what I mean? I think it's a gift to be able to change your view on something or your opinion about something based on new information or new knowledge. So I wouldn't come into this situation saying I know this situation, I know the answer to this. I think it'd be incredibly valuable to gather the input from everyone and make an informed decision from that. So one of the things that I was hearing with the staff is that that whether they're elected officials or their staff, paid staff, they want to be heard. They want the opportunity to engage in dialogue, and not saying that that has not been the case, but just saying that they want that culture to be embraced. You know, with whoever the new individual is, that they want to be able to have someone that they can come and talk to. They want to be consulted on different things and have their input be of value. So I think that being able to be, again, that communicator and that person that listens and takes all these things in and then formulates an informed decision, I think would be the approach that I would want to take, rather than saying, this is my approach and this is how we're going to have to do it. That's obviously, in my opinion, that would not be as effective.
So to add to that, on your approach, you normally would see the employee go to their supervisor first, or to the department head, or how do you feel? Do you have an open door policy?
Well, I think knowing my military background and everything else, I strongly believe in chain of command. You know, it's not effective for the organization to let people assert, you know, the processes that are already established. So first and foremost, if that was the scenario where somebody is disgruntled or they had an issue, I would encourage them to talk to their department head first and how have they resolved it. You know, if there's a conflict, if there's an issue, that would be the first thing, like how has it been addressed? And then, you know, my goal would be not to assert anyone's, have a go around. You know, I would want to work with my department heads and let that be known that that's the process. But if I would never want people to say, but you can't come talk to me either. You know, just follow the process, but if there's something, you know, something that isn't being resolved to their comfort level, then I would always want to be able to have an open door, be able to have a conversation.
Thank you.
So what have you done to further your professional development in the last 5 years?
For every 3 years, the certified CFRE, Certified Fundraising Executive,
Okay.
is a renewal process. So it's almost like your continuing education process, that sort of thing. I have renewed my certification 5 different times. So for 15 years, I've been maintaining that certification. And I will be honest with you, my recertification was up last year, but because of COVID, they extended it. So it is certainly in my thought process right now. If I am to continue with my previous career, I would move forward with, they've given kind of a grace period. So, but that would be something that, you know, always considered continuing education, training. As a past training officer, I kind of feel training is important. And you know, there's always new information and always new things. So I would welcome the opportunity through the municipal training exchanges that they have to be able to, you know, learn about processes that others are doing and what's being successful. And so I would welcome that opportunity for ongoing training and education.
Thank you.
What's your experience in establishing a budget accountability system?
Well, in terms of budgeting, you know, in every position that I've had to establish departmental budget or organizational budget depending on the position that I've had. So budgeting is a normal part of our process, going through that right now in my current position. Certainly I've spent some time looking at the budgeting process for the county. And in terms of an accountability process, I think that the safeguards that are already established and multi-departmental exchanges that are happening, I think is probably the best way to ensure that there's an effective process on managing and transparency and the accountability and the time that the board puts in terms of establishing the budgeting process, I think. But I think the fact that there's also the ongoing ability to look at the budget, assess the budget, determine, you know, are there changes that need to be made? You know, I think a budget itself is this guideline, it should be kept with. And I certainly think that we have the benefit of history to be able to look and see how budgets have been managed. Certainly looking at the budget over the last 3 years, I see that, COVID had a significant impact on the budget. So I think that's another reminder that we have to be open to the fact that change is inevitable, and sometimes things happen that are unanticipated. And so being able to be fluid in the budgeting process, I think is also a critical component of the accountability, is being able to assess what do those changes mean and what are we learning from that trend.
Thank you.
You don't have some of the prior experiences that as we talked about a profile of a candidate, the candidate would have. Have you given any thought to the first 2 or 3 months? If you were offered this job and you accepted this job, how would you spend the first 2 or 3 months to make sure you learned all there was to know about county government and each of our mandated functions and all of that we do?
Certainly there's, an intense learning curve. I would assume that there are processes and obviously resources in place. I mean, I know Chet is going to be here for a while to be an amazing resource for the person that's hired for this position. So that would be incredibly valuable to learn what has worked, how to navigate that relationship building in terms of the department heads and learning from them and asking for their input. But also, I think, seeing what has worked. I mean, this is one of the best counties in the state in terms of management, financial stability, those things. So it's not broke. So, initially, I think it's just looking at the processes that have been established and learning why have they been set up the way they have, and then to continue those processes until we can evaluate, again, are there are there things that need to be changed or tweaked or enhanced? So I think staying the course, I think, is the key thing in understanding, having an understanding of why we do the things we do. Some of the training, some of the education, municipal processes and guidelines, I think that's going to be critically important, and there are training opportunities for me to be able to get up to speed quickly on those types of things. So I think that immersing myself, in the position and understanding the processes would be the key thing initially.
You find it easy to ask for help?
Mm-hmm. I've never been quiet or shy.
What would you do your first week?
I probably want to meet with each of the department heads and spend a little time asking them what do they see as the greatest area of opportunity, and kind of take all that in, and that you just kind of sit with that a little bit, assess those things. I think that would be helpful to find out from them where they see things are working well, or what might be an opportunity for change.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to a budget issue. You've been advised by the county fiscal officer that the county budget needs to be reduced somewhere between 10 and 25% for the next fiscal year. What procedure will you use to decide how this reduction will be determined and the steps that you would take?
I think it goes back to communication. I think sitting with the department heads and, no one wins from across the board. That's dare I say, the easy way out. Just to say, we just have to cut everyone 10%. That's probably not the most effective way. Might be the quickest way, but it would be the most effective. So I would like to sit with the different departments. Everyone knows in their departments where there is excess, where there is probably an opportunity to scale back a little bit. So I think that would be the first place to start, is to engage them in this discussion and then bring that information back to the board to see where we've been able to make the biggest amount of change. And then at that point, if we find that we're far from our target, then I suppose, and that's the next round of discussions. You know, okay, now we need to take it to the next level if need be, if we've not been able to make the level of cuts that are necessary. So I think it's just a matter of continuing to communicate and to make sure that we're all part of it, we're all in this together. You know, it's not any one department against each other. It's like we have to get to this point, to this common goal.
Great, thank you.
Deborah, excuse me, how do you maintain your accountability? Excuse me. How do you maintain your accountability for county operations and yet delegate responsibility and authority to staff?
I think it gets back to setting accountability and measurable goals. You know, if there are goals that have been established and an understanding of what the anticipated outcome is, then then you have to trust. So, but always having that sense of accountability, just to check in and make sure that people are doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing, and making sure that you have your finger on the pulse of that, supporting them when they need additional support or whatever it might be to help them to be successful and to achieve that goal. I think, but not being naive to think that things are just going to happen automatically. I think that, like I said, there needs to be timelines set. There needs to be accountability on having reached those measurable outcomes and on the path to achieving the end goal.
So do you see your own accountability for a program as reliant on staff or separate, or, in your mind, how are you viewing the whole thing?
Well, I think it's collaborative. I think it's, buck stops here. So from that perspective, I think, it's ultimately my responsibility, but it's my responsibility then to engage the department heads in a way that ensures that they understand what the end goal is and that they're reporting back to me on accomplishments and that we set what that should look like. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, but at the end of the day, I understand it's going to be my responsibility.
And if I can make one last question. So let's say you had an employee that was failing, that was not meeting the goals and that were being measured, or maybe was difficultly bucking the whole thing. How would you handle that person? And try to bring them into the fold or dismiss them, or what would be your approach?
Well, again, I think it's multifaceted. I don't think there's any one crystal ball way of approaching it. However, if you have SMART goals and you have timelines and you have set that early on in terms of what the expectation is, then you set that up as a Gantt chart in terms of when things are supposed to be happening and accomplishing, and you check those things off as they're happening. And if you miss one milestone, okay, there might be a conversation. We missed this milestone. What's the rationale for why we didn't hit this target? If there's another target that's missed, then clearly what seems to be the challenge, why is this person not being able to be successful in achieving this particular goal or in moving this forward? So I think that, there should not be any surprises in communications. There should be clear timelines of when things are checked and balances, and making sure that, the timelines are being met so that you can move the entire goal forward, because inevitably someone who's not doing one component of it is going to be holding up other processes as well. So I think that, staying informed of that communication, but also being willing to call people on that and, address the accountability issue. That if things aren't happening, you need to help me understand why it's not happening. What resources do you need to make it happen? And if you're not able to do it, then what's our next step on that? If you're not able to do the task at hand, then what do we need to do to either reallocate that assignment or reallocate that individual?
Thank you.
So within that question, you answered a lot of my question, which would be your skills as far as writing, speaking, interpersonal skills. would you be able to take that, or how would you be able to take those skills to the public or the media on county issues?
I think that's probably one of my strongest components is the community engagement component. I brought these along, but I don't anticipate need to. I'll just kind of show you. Legacy magazine is a publication that is put out quarterly. I write the entire publication, I produce the entire publication, design it, get approvals for it, and then send it to the printer and work with the publisher to create a publication. So writing is certainly one of my skill sets. Dealing with the media, I was sharing with our dispatch team and look forward to meeting Matt, talking with him from the standpoint that I've been trained by FEMA as a public emergency information officer. So in the unfortunate scenario, if there ever was a crisis, I've been trained in crisis management communication, but also just, the challenges that happen on a day-to-day basis, an unfortunate fire or some of those things. I've had to have those conversations about death and dying in my current role with COVID. We lost individuals at the pavilions during COVID, and that was a very difficult and stressful time to be able to speak to the media about that. So I think I have that experience. I understand how to communicate with the media. I have, again, relationships with the media. So I think that those things would be one of the key components that I think I could bring to this position would be my ability to communicate.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You touched a little bit on teamwork. We're a board of 7 here. What, as an administrator, what would you expect out of us as a board?
As I keep saying, I don't want it to become trite about communication. You each have a responsibility to your constituents in your respective communities, and districts, and I understand that. So I see it being part of my responsibility to meet with each of you, talk to each of you, get a better understanding of your particular district. What are the challenges? What are the, what's happening in Northport is very different than what's happening at the border of Grand Traverse County in District 1. So, I understand that each of the communities is very unique and has, different things that, the expectation levels for you. So how I can help to be a resource for each of the commissioners and help you achieve your goals, I think is part of what my role is. My role, I understand, is not to be the decision maker as much as it is to be the person that provides all the resources for you to make an informed decision. So I think finding out what each of the commissioners is looking for in this position and trying to find that common ground of how I best serve is, I think, one of the first things that would be critical to this position.
Thank you.
Tell us about a successful or unsuccessful experience of communicating with board members about an unpopular goal or objective.
It's interesting. I think when we had the last interview, one of the things that I, again, pride myself on is integrity. And honesty is something that, even when it's painful, and we've had some issues with our current board, how can I put this? We had a change in leadership, and the previous individual, that was our CEO, was amazing, 20 years in the organization, 20 plus years. Because he had been there so long, he just had an integrated understanding of processes and how things worked, and just did things, and he was a past CFO. And so he took care of a lot of the financial things, and when that individual left, it created a void, in processes and understanding. People were like, well, why do we do it that way? Well, it's because we've always done it that way. So I think that the point where I'm trying to get to with this is that sometimes when there is conflict or there is a misunderstanding, it's an opportunity to enhance your knowledge and your understanding. And I think going through that whole process, as painful as it was at times, about people felt that they weren't informed about processes, or they weren't informed about why decisions had been made a certain way, the board has come out on the other side much stronger, much more confident, much more informed about things. So I think that I'd like to think that because we went through the process and I provided them with information and helped them to understand a lot of the different components of financial reporting and tracking and a lot of the key elements that maybe were in inertia that they really weren't interested or informed of in the past, has made them better board members. So I think, again, sometimes we all get complacent in processes of how things have been done, but when we really take a deeper dive and have a better understanding of why things are done, it makes us all stronger. So it was painful at the time going through it, but we've all come out in a much better place.
Thank you.
What's the most difficult situation you've had to deal with in your professional career, and how was it resolved?
It sounds familiar to the COVID question.
Yeah.
Or my response to that. Every professional, I think, has at some point in throughout their career opportunities to challenge the system, I suppose, or challenge ourselves, probably more appropriately so. So I think in my career, I think it's probably been more of a scenario where I've challenged myself, or I've been given an opportunity to change, to move to new positions. And so most of the times where in my career there's been, I can't say conflict, it's been more about decisions about changing and moving to a new position or a new opportunity. I'm just trying to think of examples. I've been recruited from a couple different positions to move to other positions, other professional, like when I was, for example, when I was at Otsego Memorial, went through a campaign, and the campaign consultants had asked me if I would be interested in working for this consulting company, because they saw that I had a skill set that was valuable. And that meant moving, not moving, but I was a transient. I would go into communities for 4 to 6 months, and then, work on a campaign, build it to success, and then move on to the next project. So the challenge with that is that you're always in a constant state of flux of change. And I think sometimes I thrive on it, and other times I think I just have to caution myself to not take change for change's sake. There was a point to really where I was going with this. And repeat the question one more time for me, because I want to make a key point.
The most difficult situation you've had to deal with, and how it was resolved.
In this particular situation that I'm thinking of, it's making a career decision, and knowing that it's going to create change in your life, create change, but it's a growing opportunity. And at the end of the day, I'm very blessed that I have a very wonderful and understanding husband who supported my career ambitions throughout my life. And these career decisions have served me well. It's brought me to this opportunity, it's brought me to this point in my life where I think I just really use the culmination of all my life experiences to be able to serve Leelanau County.
Thank you. We all learn from the mistakes we make. Could you share a job-related mistake, a big mistake you might have made, and what you learned from it? I could write a book.
I'm I'm sure I could too, Commissioner. I guess if you look back, if I have to use the word regrets, because, I try to use the mindset, no regrets, but I think it's not really a career one as it is much an educational one. I wish I would have gotten my master's degree. That's probably the greatest regret that I don't have. I was only 8 credits away. And I was offered a position with a Fortune 500 company to work with them and be their HR manager. And of course, I was much younger then and much more naive. But the point is that I think that sometimes, mistakes that happen are blessings, but that's one that I wish I would have, so it didn't impact my life negatively, at least as far as I know. I've been very blessed in my life, but that's one thing that I can hear my parents saying, I wish you would have gotten your degree.
Thank you. We're going to do one.
Satisfy the educators in the group. No, but I truly.
We're going to do another round, and then it'll be your turn to ask us. Yep.
Why, thank you for the opportunity. So, explain in your own words your understanding of the role of the county administrator relative to the relationship with the board.
Yeah, I think addressed that a little bit earlier too, in terms of making sure that the board is informed, is aware of key issues, to do the research, to do the intel, to report on briefings or whatever it is going to help the board to be best informed, or to gather information from the board as to utilize the board's knowledge out in the community and the resources that you all have to be able to create a collective understanding of key issues. So I think it's kind of a give and take. One part to be an information gatherer, and then the other part to be then the resource to be able to put that together in a collective intelligence, collective knowledge.
And let's expand that a little bit to the elected departments. What do you think your role is as county administrator in relationship to the other elected offices, departments?
I think similarly, that having an understanding of what their responsibilities and what their requirements are, not so much job requirements, but what is their responsibility to the county and to the constituents and also to the board. And then when there are issues or concerns or whatever, being that information gathering person to go to them and say, look, this is an issue that's coming up. What's your understanding of this issue? How do you see that we can work collaboratively to resolve the issue? And then bring that information back to the board, or find pathways for us to be able to work together to be able to achieve those goals.
The reason I separated the elected departments from the appointed departments is because our elected operate under different mandates. And I think there needs to be an awareness that although we have all great directors, our elected are, have mandates that they're required to fulfill. And with that, how does that, how can you work around that? How will you work around their mandated duties?
Interesting choice of words. I don't know if I think work within, understanding that if they have legal requirements or legal mandates that they have to accomplish, then we need to be cognizant of that and to be supportive of that rather than being combative of it. Then the question ultimately has to be asked of those individuals, how can we work together to accomplish this? Rather than you need to do this. And so I think having that mindset, maybe a little bit of semantics, but more importantly, an approach.
I think it's important that any administrator who comes here in the new position has a clear understanding of that. Yeah. So thank you.
You know, Deborah, you've talked a lot about, in terms of how you're going to motivate employees and see success, utilizing goals and objectives and planning. And so describe how you would involve the county, department heads, elected officials, perhaps residents in planning and setting these types of goals that then you're going to measure as a benchmark of success.
Well, I think part of that comes from the board and getting input in terms of strategic planning. Like what do we see as, for the county, what do the commissioners see as key goals or key initiatives that we need to work for? And then how do we break those down by department or by segments so that we can make that measurable? And so having worked with you on strategic planning processes, I know that, there are already a lot of those things in place. And then it's a matter of then, like I said, breaking them down into bite-sized or manageable initiatives so that people can be given those goals and timelines and strategies and objectives and how, again, we can build on those successes. I think another key component of that strategic plan is to engage the staff in that process. They're in the trenches, literally doing the job. They may have ideas on how to do things better, how to do things more efficiently, how to do things, better. And so I think part of that is not just the goal setting part, but communicating those goals, and before they're cast in stone, to be able to engage all the constituents in the process so that there's buy-in. And that everybody sees that they're part of the process.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent.
Last question. Since you've answered almost everything, it's become more difficult for us to find you some questions and stick to the ones we should be sticking to. But we haven't spoke about the MERS. How familiar are you with MERS retirement, our retirement system?
So Grand Traverse Pavilions also has the MERS, same municipal MERS program. So a member of the MERS program. Been through several of the training programs on MERS in terms of understanding it from my perspective as somebody that is receiving potentially those benefits in the future. Also have been through 2 rounds of bonding to help to reduce the pension debt. So have been, again, through the public aspect of that, so understanding the financing of the MERS program, seeing, from other counties' experiences in terms of how that, if not funded fully, then the challenges that come with that. So I have a working knowledge of it. Again, not an expert on it, but it's certainly an area that I think that I could, get up to speed quickly in terms of understanding that, understand those processes and how to manage that. And I understand legal counsel is part of that as well. So again, none of these things are done in a vacuum. Same thing with, I think, the bargaining issue and the negotiations and union discussions. None of that is done in a vacuum. There's expertise that is available. I think it'd be a pretty quick study on both of those issues.
Okay, thank you.
About a year ago, actually it was a year ago tonight, we created 2 new department heads, HR and finance. They're going to be under your umbrella as administrator. With your past experience in your career, what can you bring to the table to help these 2 department heads, and how would you support them?
Well, certainly staffing is one of the greatest challenges right now. I think for any organization, I think that, certainly initially, I know there was a lot of concern about the establishment of the two departments. I've not had the ability personally to really assess at this point, how that has been working. I can only tell you from my own experience how grateful that I am for Darcy's involvement and her communication skill. And I've seen some of the things in her office. I mean, I think she has certainly exemplified what I would anticipate that I would want an HR director to be. And in terms of the finance component, I think bringing Jared on to help with, the budget and the finances of the organization. Certainly accountability and transparency are a key component for both of those departments. And so regardless of who is sitting in those positions, how they're being handled, I think the key element of that is effectiveness and transparency. And at the end of the day, is the job being done and is there been enhancements made? And,
Well done.
And what was your last statement? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. I was distracted.
I think at the end of the day, it's about the assessment of how effective are they being managed, how effective are they at doing the job.
Thank you.
We're all getting tired. How would you accept, how would employees say you accept criticism? Give us an example of a time you had to deal with criticism.
Humor is always the best policy. I mean, we're all human, we all make mistakes. I by no means have all the answers, but I seek to do the right thing. And that's kind of the litmus test. And if sometimes I get it wrong or I offend, I would want to know that. I want to be better. So I like to think that I'm not someone that takes offense to criticism. I think that's a key component too, is how the criticism is offered. Is it meant in a way that is to enhance the leadership skills and abilities, or is it provided in a way that is meant to be degrading or insulting? Like I said, we're all human, and so I would like to think that if it's meant truly with the intent to help me to be a better person, I welcome it. If it's meant to be degrading or insulting or something like that, then that's the question, why would it be necessary? So I think it's just a matter of what the scenario and where it's coming from.
Thank you.
But I welcome any opportunities to be a better person.
Always, yes.
How about the Open Meetings Act and Robert's Rules? How familiar are you with those?
Robert's Rules, I'm a little bit of a geek. I've always loved parliamentary components. I've served on different committees that I've been on in terms of parliamentarian for different groups. So I really enjoy understanding processes, running a meeting, how to, all of those elements. Forwarding a motion, that kind of thing. So, point of order, those types of components. So, I'm, again, not an expert, but I've always kind of prided myself on knowing processes and helping the board to navigate through those systems. In terms of Open Meetings Act, certainly in my role on the township, it's one of the components I need to be familiar with and aware of, and understanding that people have the right to be able to seek information that's been discussed. I myself have utilized that, so I see it being incredibly valuable, and I think it's an important part of the transparency of government.
Thank you.
Before I ask my last question, does anybody have a question that you'd like to ask? Then I get to ask the last question, then you get to ask us. But you've spent 2 different sessions with us. We've checked your references. We've interviewed 3 different people for this position. Tonight at our evening meeting, we're going to be talking about the candidates we've interviewed. You got a couple of minutes to tell us why you're the best candidate and why we should hire you. Could you do that?
Sure. I think that one of the, not just one of, but what makes me unique as a candidate for this position is that not just the fact that I'm a resident of Leelanau County, because I know that the other two individuals are also have connections to Leelanau County. But I think the fact that I currently serve as an elected official, so I understand the nuances that the board has in terms of accepting that role. The fact that I've been a trained information emergency preparedness officer, so the communication component, the chain of command, past EMT, so understanding the importance of services to our community. I think that's a unique element that I bring. The fact that I have worked in previous careers as a Chamber of Commerce executive, integrating all the components of community, whether it be housing and how that interfaces with the ability to generate business and economic development, how economic development is dependent upon healthcare and the health and human services, and how that all those components again combine the residential housing stock and how that integrates with all that. So being able, as I said earlier, that 30,000-foot view of being able to see how community is impacted on so many different levels, and with the new broadband and some of the other components are happening, how is that going to play into economic development and future healthcare, the whole concept of home-based healthcare systems and the internet system and technology. So I think that being able to look at it from that perspective and see how all those things come together is incredibly important. Having worked with our local legislators and having an understanding of who those individuals are and how that can help us to be able to generate revenue for the county. The concept of the new rural economic development group that's being formed and how that again can be access to be able to provide economic support for the county and to support our services and programs. Already mentioned about emergency services. So I think that it's a combination of all of those things. Probably not to the component of being a specialist, but almost a value generalist that can look at all of those things together. Yes, I understand and I acknowledge that there are some areas that I may not have the same skill set as somebody that's done collective bargaining, with the unions. But I've also worked as an HR manager, so I do have an understanding of human resources. I do have an understanding of how those components have to come into play and the legal elements of those discussions and how there is a very specific process on how those discussions have to happen. So I think that it would be a learning curve for me, but not a long learning curve, because I have an understanding of a lot of the processes and a lot of the things already. And certainly probably the thing that gives me the greatest advantage is the fact that I have great relationships with so many people in the community and so many different factions in the community. So I think that would provide a valuable asset to the board. And the fact that I have board strategic planning, board development, and I've worked with boards my entire career and understand that first and foremost is to make sure that the effectiveness of the organization and the board is solid, and that is my role, is to serve the board.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any questions for us? You could address them to any one of us, or you could address them to Chet.
I suppose I will give the opportunity for our two commissioners that will be leading the board to help me to have an understanding, because you can speak freely. So Commissioner Rushton and Commissioner Souls, what would each of you offer to this position, this opportunity? What's the skill set? What do you see as being the greatest area of need for the administrator?
Well, for me, I have said all along, honesty and integrity are very important to me. Transparency, communication, I think, is a very important aspect. between the administrator and the commissioners. So many times commissioners do not visit the county building on a daily basis, so there's a lot of information that is missed or not spoken about. And so sometimes, we get somewhat of a surprise when we come to meeting. Not always. Chet's been pretty good about, keeping us informed, but, from Friday to Friday, there's things that slip through the cracks. So a little bit better information, keeping your board informed. I guess that's about it for now.
This is a tough one because, Chad, I've now worked with for 8 years, and he mirrors a lot of things that I think are important in this job. Understanding community, the ability to work with community and have those relationships that you're speaking of, how to effectively communicate with staff, how to show staff you're caring about them, and making them feel that they're important to the organization. I'd also add in what Commissioner Rushton said about integrity and honesty, and I think someone who can manage but also has the skill to stand up and make those tough decisions when they need to be made and then hold to them. Not fall prey to politics is a big one in my book, to remember that we're all here serving in a nonpartisan way, serving all the community and not just a segment or not just our districts. So I think those are probably some of the key. The fiscal management and all of this is important, but at the end of the day, success is going to rely on how effective someone is in dealing with the staff, communicating with both the board and the community, and being able to deliver on the goals that you were talking about. And that takes honesty and integrity.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
An observation, probably more so than a question. I think all of you know that I know Chet, and I have had the opportunity on several different scenarios to see him engage after hours on telephone calls. He's incredibly professional, has always been with the greatest professionalism, integrity. I just want to say that I truly would be honored to learn from Chet during the transition, if given the opportunity. He certainly has impressed me, and I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done, Chet, and thank the entire board. But I could learn a great deal from Chet during the time. So I would aspire to continue the processes and things that he set forward.
Thank you. Anything else?
I had a budget question that I asked Mr. Gallagher earlier that just had to do with, I think it was on the special, let me think now, if I got this right. I think it was one of the special projects budgets that in pre-COVID 2019, it was less than $1,000. And then I noticed in 2023, the budget, it was being recommended like for $165,000. And I was just curious if that was COVID related, or if there had been, if it's broadband related, or if it was the ARPA money funds. That was really the only area in the budget where I really saw a significant change and increase from, pre-COVID to current. That I was just curious, what was the, if anyone can speak to what was the impetus for that?
I think Melinda asked that same question at the commission meeting.
I believe I did. I'm trying to remember what his answer was. Michelle, do you remember what it was?
I don't remember what phone number you're talking about, so we can look it up.
Yeah, it's okay. It was just, I think it was just a special projects fund, And I just remember looking at it going, just kind of looking for where were any blips, kind of like, oh, what happened there?
I'm just guessing here. We got part of the CARES Act, we got a community grant that we worked with all the townships and nonprofits. And it was about that much money that we distributed. So I'm just guessing if that was it, because
It would make
we
sense.
purchased a lot of
It's not the
equipment for the
ARPA, though.
townships. What's
Yeah,
that?
it's not ARPA though.
No, it was the CARES Act.
The CARES
It was a
Act.
community development
That might have
grant
been
that we were, it was reimbursable, but I worked with the townships and the fire departments to get their equipment and supplies. I'm just guessing because the amount that we actually reimbursed the local governments was about that amount. So I'm guessing that may be it. I'm just talking. Darcy, do you have an idea? Yeah, I'm just guessing because we don't normally do that with the townships and local fire departments, but we actually had to purchase it and then gave to them, or they had to provide proof of purchase and we reimbursed them. So we had to physically write checks for all these purchases. So I'm guessing that was it.
Okay, like I said, that was.
But we could actually look it up, but
Yeah.
the amount that we sent out was pretty close to that amount.
Very good. And then lastly, if I can, and this is really for anyone, I know having had the conversation, myself with Jeff Shaw, the township supervisor, he actually would welcome, the opportunity to have more dialogue and more interaction. And I'm just curious if there has been, or if there is a plan to, and Chet, this is probably for you, what is the current process for engaging with townships, or how, are there opportunities you think maybe going forward, or is that kind of?
It actually varies from township to townships. Some of them I have quite a bit of interaction in, and they call me for advice or questions. Other townships remind me they're an independent unit of government and we have no authority over them. And so it really does vary who's on the township board, who's supervisors, and what the issues are.
Okay.
But we certainly have been open to dialogue with them. We have partnered with townships. A great example is that CARES Act money. We didn't have to do that. We chose to do that. There was a lot of paperwork involved, but we felt it was good partnership with the townships, and I think most were very grateful. But not all townships want input, and they truly are a separate unit of government, but we have no authority. That's probably a big misperception that a lot of people in the county have, not knowing government. I mean, I can understand why. People on a regular basis call me and assume we can override decision made at township level. And we, 99% of the time, we have no authority to get involved with that. But people think, okay, the township, and then it's county government in terms of hierarchy, but that's not the case at all. They truly are a separate unit of government, as are the villages. So that's kind of a common thing. So we do have dialogue, I would say, on a regular basis, if they choose to have it. And we certainly are open for if they have ideas. I do get calls from quite a few township officials asking about FOIA or Open Meetings Act, or about some federal guidelines, or about what they can legally do or not do, and we try to work with them when we can. Because most of those township officials are part-time with full-time jobs and trying to make the best of the situation. So we are open to that if they choose to participate.
I would, if I can, I would add in there that I think a lot of us commissioners do have a strong relationship with our boards. And again, it probably varies board to board. I know with my two my two townships, I always am giving a report at the meeting, and they'll always ask questions in terms of, and things that, you follow up on and find out for them. So that's another way communication evolves, at least, and I'm sure it's different township by township, but at least with some of us, that's how we encourage additional collaboration between our townships and the county.
That actually just inspired me, if I may, one more question.
Mhm.
What, I have always been the type of person that, to be involved, and not to overcommit myself, but from the standpoint of expectations about going to some of the township meetings, or being more involved in the chamber or the Economic Development Foundation. Are there areas or different things that you as a board have expectations or, would like to see this individual be more involved in certain components or entities or commissions or?
Well, I can speak to, now that Chad has found his way to Northport, he can find it without a map now. He cooks pancakes for the fly-in. He participates in the monthly meetings with the Leelanau Township Leadership Team. He finds his way to Barb's Bakery often, and I suspect you do that with all of the townships.
Actually, that's, in all seriousness, is the fun part of the job, being out there talking to people. There's a lot of great people in Leelanau County, and it's an honor
That's how you
to
learn
know
about
that.
things.
Yeah.
And I would add that I think that our involvement with the township, a lot of times, other than directly being representatives for our township, is through our department head. So quite often, and it's not an easy position for Trudy to be in at planning, but if she wants to get a recycling site in a township, she has to go down there and make the sell on behalf of us, really. The other, obviously, our clerk knows all of the clerks and works very closely with the clerks on the elections and probably more. I just can't think right now. Matt, of course, with our fire departments, even though they're not all, they're township, but they're multi-township in some cases. He works with them. So there's a lot of collaboration, I would say. But as you said that, I did like the idea of, right now, the township supervisors often try to have a couple meetings a month where they just can all come together and look at the issues, et cetera. And it's very difficult because some of the supervisors work out of their offices 9 to 5, and some of the supervisors are still working full-time and working out of their home, so it's been difficult. But if there were a possibility for a couple times a month to have, that round table with our supervisors and the board of commissioners, I think that would be a really interesting dialogue, just to be up on what issues the townships are dealing with. As you say, communication. It all boils down to you don't know what you don't know.
I thought one example that the commissioners really should be proud of and deserve a lot of credit is in 2016, we knew that the fire departments and first responders had trouble with equipment, communication equipment. And that impacts everybody. If someone gets hurt in Elmwood Township, it doesn't matter. It's an issue for everyone, and everyone works together. And the county made the tough decision to purchase equipment for all the fire departments. And it was a 10-year plan, and it was a lot of money. But we all got together and said, this is good for Leelanau County. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you're in a car accident or if you have a heart attack, you need assistance. So we worked all the fire departments. We worked all the townships. Matt and I went to the townships meeting. We went to the fire departments, and we got support from them. We picked up, 85% of the cost ourselves? Because it's tax dollars money, and it impacts everyone. Yeah, the people who pay your taxes don't care where it goes, so they want that service. So we worked all the townships, we worked all the fire departments, and we got support from every single township and every single fire department to enter this 10-year agreement, and we supplied new equipment for the fire departments. Communication.
Where are you right now in that?
It was 2016, our first payment was 2017, so we're about halfway through that process.
Okay. I just wanted to know when it would have to be negotiated again.
So that's a great example where the commissioners took on a very difficult task.
That's awesome.
It would have been easy to say, well, that's not our problem, because we're not responsible for their equipment, but it's working together with the township officials and the fire departments and all the board members.
As a past first responder, that's awesome.
I just would like to point out that annually, our administrator typically attends the Cedar Polka Fest. So I would assume that this board is going to want to see that tradition carried forward. Are you up to that?
I'm up to that.
Okay.
I was there already. And I was honored with the veterans celebration that they do too. That's very impressive.
Very good. Thursday night. Good.
Thank
Polka needs improvement, so.
you, Deb, for coming. And we we are going to meet again tonight, and we're going to hear a little bit from Darcy about staff input, and then we're going to talk about where we're going. So we're going to leave you here and dismiss this meeting as soon as we have public comment, if there is any. I don't think there is. So are we ready to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.